So methods of age measurement indicate a young Earth. Now we're looking at the amount of meteoritic dust, which points to a young Earth. One of these lines of evidence of a recent Earth is derived from the study of meteorites and comets, of which there are large numbers in our solar system. A tremendous amount of meteoritic material falls each year on the Earth. Estimates vary widely, but the most careful studies have been made by Hans Pettersson of the Swedish Oceanographic Institute. Pettersson calculated that the total quantity of dust of meteor origin in the atmosphere up to a height of 60 miles amounts to 28,600,000 tons. Half the total, 14.3 tons of such dust, settles to Earth each year. 14.3 tons of new dust must enter the atmosphere. Isaac Asimov, Science Digest. Pettersson confirms this. If meteoritic dust descended at the same rate as the dust created by the explosion of the Indonesian volcano Krakatoa in 1883, then my data indicate that the amount of meteoritic dust landing on the Earth every year is 14 million tons. Hans Pettersson, Scientific American. The significance of this large amount of meteoritic dust in terms of the supposed great age of the Earth is noted by Asimov as follows. Of course, this goes on year after year, and the Earth has been in existence as a solid body for a good long time, for perhaps as long as 5 billion years. Well, you assume that as part of your experiment. I think you've got to not be so unscientific there, but anyway, if through all that time meteor dust had settled to the Earth at the same rate it does today, but then by now, if it were undisturbed, it would form a layer 54 feet thick over all the surface of the Earth. Obviously, no layer of meteoric dust of any appreciable thickness, certainly not 54 feet, is found around the Earth's surface, although some indications of such a layer have been found on the ocean bottoms, but not 54 feet thick. Pettersson and Rotchi have found good evidence from the peculiar nickel content of deep sea deposits, both in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, that several thousand tons per day of meteoritic material are accumulated by the Earth. F.L. Whipple wrote apparently a book on geophysics. The absence of this meteoritic dust layer on the Earth's surface cannot be reasonably accounted for in terms of crustal mixing processes, as Asimov claims. This type of material is composed mostly of iron with large amounts of nickel and other relatively rare components of the Earth's crust, and these elements are not found in sufficient abundance to correspond to the amount supposedly accreted by meteoritic showers. For example, the average nickel content of meteorites is of the order of 2.5%, whereas nickel constitutes only about 0.0008% of the rocks of the Earth's crust. Now, let's see. Thus, about 312 times as much nickel per unit volume occurs in meteorites as in the Earth's crust. This means that the 54 feet thickness of meteoritic dust would have to have been dispersed through a crustal thickness of at least 312 by 54 feet, or more than 3 miles, to yield the present crustal nickel component percentage, even under the impossible assumption that there was no nickel in the crust to begin with. Similar calculations could be made for cobalt and other important constituents of meteorites, all testifying that there simply cannot have been meteoritic dust falling on the Earth at present rates throughout any 5 billion years of geologic time. Similar calculations indicate that enormous quantities of iron would have accumulated on the surface form meteoritic matter during geologic time. Iron is the most abundant element in the meteorites and is also abundant in the Earth's crust. Can this surface iron be not the Earth's original substance, but at least in significant part the accumulated meteoritic dust of ages? According to my calculations, the dust would account for all of the iron in the upper 1 plus or minus miles of the Earth's solid crust. I think it's plus, minus of the Earth's crust, which certainly accounts, too, for all the iron we've managed to dig up. In any case, Isaac Asimov says this, but the thing is, does anyone actually think that all the iron in the upper 1 plus or minus miles of crust was derived from meteoritic dust? Such a proposition seems out of reason on its face. Yet this is the strange conclusion to which we are led if meteorite dust has been falling on the Earth for anything like 5 billion years. Just follow the dots. Tektite's meteoritic glass disproves evolution. The special type of glassy meteorites, let me just de-italicize this. The special type of glassy meteorites known as tektites is still more difficult to interpret. These are found in various localities in the form of what seem to have been showers of the particles. In contrast to these great ages, the estimated argon ages of tektites are only 1 million to 10 million years. Gerling and Yashchenko regard this as evidence against a cosmic origin for tektites. L.H. Ahrens. Nevertheless, as Stair in a summary of the evidence says, although some investigators believe that these glass bodies are of terrestrial origin, the preponderance of evidence seems to point to a cosmic source as the origin. Ralph Stair, Tektites and the Lost Planet, Scientific Monthly. Sounds like more of a novel idea that's unscientific. The significant feature about the relatively small ages indicated for the tektites is that they seem to be smaller than those of some of the terrestrial strata in which they are deposited. Each of the major occurrences is thought to be one shower. Those in Czechoslovakia are weathering out of Miocene strata. Those in Texas, first described by the writer, are thought to be weathering out of Eocene strata, and those in Australia may be recent. Virgil E. Barnes, Tektites, Geotimes. They each have their own idea, but they don't seem to coordinate with one another or coordinate their conclusions very well. Another significant fact, difficult to reconcile with uniformitarianism, is that the tektites are apparently not found in any strata earlier than the Tertiary. Neither tektites nor other meteorites have been found in any of the ancient geological formations. Ralph Stair in his work. This, of course, is hard to reconcile with the generally accepted uniformitarian concept that meteorites have been falling on the Earth at essentially present rates throughout some 5 billion years of geologic time. They just can't find this stuff on the Earth. True meteorites, in fact, have apparently not been found in any but recent deposits. It is only the meteorites that escape decomposition in passage throughout the atmosphere that can possibly be recognized. There probably are many of these, and in the deep sea, where the rate of deposition is extremely slow, cosmic particles may rate high in the sediments as compared to places where other sediments are abundant. No meteorites have ever been found in the geologic column. Such an absence of evidence, and yet they go on and write books. Twennehoffel wrote about this. The amount of helium now in the atmosphere corresponds to a young Earth. Oops. Helium-4. I remember reading this a while back. Good to share this when you learn this, then you remember it. Another type of geophysical chronometer indicating an anomalously youthful age of the Earth is the accumulation of radioactively derived gases in the atmosphere. The most important of these, of course, is radiogenic helium, which, as we have already pointed out, is derived from the disintegration of uranium and thorium in the Earth's crust. Some of this radiogenic helium, of course, escapes and eventually finds its way to the surface, where it is then added to the atmosphere. But it has been realized for many years that there is not nearly enough helium in the atmosphere to correspond to the supposed age of the Earth and the rate of escape of helium from the crustal rocks into the atmosphere. It may be reasonably supposed that the entire atmosphere supply of helium-4 is of radioactive origin. Goldschmidt, considering the known helium content of the atmosphere and the known concentrations of uranium and thorium series in primary rocks, concludes that all the atmospheric helium would have been produced in the course of 2 billion years from 2 kilograms per square centimeter of primary rock. This represents about 1.3% of the total amount of primary rock that has been eroded and which therefore might have been expected to have delivered its helium to the atmosphere. G.E. Hutchinson, American scientist. This implies that the true maximum age for the Earth on the basis of helium production would be only 1/3% of 2 billion or 26 million years. And even this is impossibly high because it neglects any primary atmospheric helium that was originally there and any former higher radioactive decay rates, as well as helium that may have made its way to the surface from non-denuded rocks. The payment used for avoiding this conclusion is to assume that the excess helium generated in the past has somehow attained the escape velocity, overcoming gravity, and escaping from the atmosphere completely. This requires that the temperatures in the exosphere, the outermost portion of the atmosphere, must be extremely high. H. Pettersson and Lindemann and others have shown that the amount of helium released from radioactive rocks during the geological life of the Earth exceeds the amount now in the atmosphere. Assuming Stoney's mechanism to be responsible for the loss of helium that must have occurred, L. Spitzer deduced that the temperature at the critical level is either about 1800 degrees centigrade or, though usually less, is occasionally more, perhaps for 2% of the time and is 2300 degrees centigrade. And even greater values may be required, for Maine has recently concluded that the amount of helium released and lost is far greater than has been supposed. Some theorists find the high temperature mentioned difficult to accept. D.R. Bates, Composition and Structure of the Atmosphere. No independent evidence of such high temperatures yet exists. In other words, instead of accepting the obvious conclusion from the helium content of the atmosphere that the Earth's age must be much less than usually believed, it is rather deduced that the exosphere temperatures must be sufficiently high, which they don't have a way of measuring, to permit helium to escape, regardless of how extreme this requirement may be. Dr. Don R. Patton. One very serious implication of erroneous conclusions of the age of the Earth by evolutionists is seen in the uranium-lead method, which decays down to lead from uranium-238. And that's the method that's supposed to determine the age of the Earth. It produces